Hi, Outlaw Bookseller, Stephen E. Andrews here. Let's get the chair a bit higher up. And this is the first in a series of videos of writers I like who I think of as formula writers or comfort reads. By formula, I don't mean anything bad by that, because there's nothing wrong with a formula for good entertainment, for good reading, if the formula is original and nobody else can replicate it. Now, obviously, this is a pretty hard thing to pull off. But as I say, some writers do it beautifully and they provide those wonderful experiences. You go back to their work time and time again, and often they'll do a series and a character or a range of characters you really love. And you can go back to them and they're comfortable, but at the same time, they're unique. Now, there's lots of formula writing out there which isn't unique, it is just a formula. But I really want to cover people who I think have something that nobody else really has. And I want to start today with one of my female authors that I really, really admire, which is somebody called Chelsea Quinn Yarbro. Now, Chelsea Quinn Yarbro has had a really marvelous and long career. She's written all sorts of things: horror, science fiction, fantasy, books for children, westerns. She's used several different pseudonyms. She's also written some new age books as well. And she really is exceptionally talented. And overall, I would describe her as a historical writer, a writer of historical fiction that's melded with other genres. And this is one of her historical novels. It's actually a horror novel as well. And Chelsea's view is very much that history is horror. And of course, when you look at history, she's absolutely right. Lots of terrible things have happened, but obviously they're very inspiring for writers. And, you know, if you've got to know about history, if you don't understand the past, you can't understand the present. So it's an old cliche, but increasingly, I think people are afraid to read historical books. There's a big sort of wave of classically inspired things at the moment, but historical fiction does have its place. So this is history as horror. So Chelsea is best known for a series of books about a vampire nobleman called Saint-Germain, and she wrote the first one of these around about the same time that Anne Rice was writing Interview with the Vampire. So it's 76, 77. And the first book in the sequence, I've got a couple of copies here, if I can actually find them. You'll see behind me that huge pile of hardcovers and trade paperbacks. There's two piles there. Those are some of her other books in her Comte de Saint-Germain series. And this was the first one, which is a book called Hotel Transylvania. And a very romantic cover there, as you see, very gothic cover. This is, I believe this is a book club edition. It's not a true first, because that cost the earth. This cost me about £6. And you probably know the title because, of course, the title was filched for one of those Pixar kids films. And she must have been really infuriated because Hotel Transylvania, it's a great title. It's actually a real place in Paris. Because hotel back in the sort of, it was the 18th century, meant like salon. You know, people would have a hotel, a house, and they gambled there and what have you, and had all sorts of fun, decadent times. But of course, you can't copyright a title, which I always think is absurd. You know, it's absolutely absurd. So it's a shame, really. So this is the real Hotel Transylvania. Just show you, this is a later edition from Stealth Press, who did some handsome reissues of Chelsea's books. And this is kind of in all the reference books. And she wrote 6 of these Saint-Germain books initially. And then she took a gap for quite a long time. They went back to them. And altogether now, there's about 30 of them. And I got into these about 12 years ago, and I absolutely love them. They are fantastic books, and everybody I've recommended them to who likes good fiction has really enjoyed these, especially if you like historical fiction. They're amazing because her research is absolutely fantastic. And what's particularly good about them is that she writes out of order of internal chronology. So she just picks a period of history she's interested in, or a place, where it be ancient Egypt. This is kind of the backstory of Saint-Germain, because he's about 5,000 years old. He's a really old vampire. And she just picks a period she's interested in and goes from there. And you can read them in terms of order of internal chronology. And, you know, that's an interesting way to read them, but you mustn't get hung up on that. The whole point is you just pick one up, You pick a period that interests you and you read them, because they do have a formula. They are much the same. Some are more dramatic than others. The first one I read was actually this trade paperback here called Saint-Germain Memoirs, which is short fiction about the Comte de Saint-Germain. And it's a great book. And it goes from ancient Greece, where Saint-Germain has an encounter with Socrates' wife, who's rather put upon, to the 1970s, because he's immortal. And through his eyes, we see human history in all its terror and horror. And the overriding message that I get from these is how religion, particularly, has been used to oppress people for thousands of years. And it's pretty damning about Christianity, actually. She never comes out and says it. It's just implied in what you see. You just get the weight of history, and you find that by the time you've read quite a few of them, you realize how different people's lives were to our own. So if you're going to read vampire fiction, you may as well read something that's really good and non-formulaic in the sort of teeny way. It's just a special formula that she uses. And Saint-Germain's an interesting figure. There's been all sorts of depictions of him over the years on the book covers, and he is very dashing, but he's not tall. He's short. He's a short man with small hands. She makes a lot about that. Ben Kane, a historical fiction writer I know, I talked Ben into buying one of her books and reading it, and he thought it was really good. It was one of the ones set in Rome. Some of them are set in ancient Rome, and he thought the historical detail was fantastic, but he got driven a bit mad by the fact that Quinn Yarbro keeps referring to Saint-Germain's small hands. But, to me, it's just the same as going on about Jack Reacher being tall. The Comte de Saint-Germain was a real person. Looking him up on Wikipedia, he was possibly two or three people. He was this mysterious figure in the sort of Louis sort of period in France, the pre-revolutionary period. And he would pop up all over Europe. He claimed to be immortal. Nobody ever saw him eat. He was rumoured to be a spy. And so she based the character on this guy. So if you imagine that he was a real person, it's pretty interesting. The depiction of him in the first book that she published, Hotel Transylvania, is quite conventional compared to the later ones. He's sort of a very dashing, romantic figure. He goes up against a Satanist to rescue a young woman in peril. It's also bodice-ripping stuff. It's great fun. And it got quite a lot of acclaim at the time. And as I say, it was just after Interview with the Vampire, which is still a fantastic book. And then Chelsea then expanded the mythology. And to me, she really found her feet in the second novel in the sequence. Now, when I say second novel, as I said, you don't have to read these in eternal chronology, because she just picks periods at random that she's interested in, does the research, and then writes them. And this is The Palace, which was set in Renaissance Italy, all about the Medici family are characters in this, and Saint-Germain is a nobleman. And this is a fantastic book. I've read this one a couple of times. So if you want to read about Renaissance Italy, and I love Italy, so I really enjoyed this. That's The Palace. Stealth have done an edition of that more recently as well, so it's worth looking out for. Some of these are available, I think, still in trade paperbacks, but a lot of them now are only available as ebooks, which is a real shame, because a few years ago I managed to get some of the trades for the bookshop I worked in, and I was selling them quite regularly. And this is one of the trades I was selling, which is my favourite of the initial 6 volumes, which is Blood Games, which is set in Nero's Rome. And this is a really dramatic, exciting one, where Saint-Germain is a foreign nobleman, lives outside the city walls of Rome, and he helps a Roman woman who is horribly abused by her husband, who's a very powerful figure. I think he's in the Senate, I seem to remember. And Blood Games, so it's a print-on-demand trade paperback. And it's a great book, so do pick it up. That would be the one I would recommend to read first, to get a real feel for what Saint-Germain is like in most of the books, whereas Hotel Transylvania, as I say, is less typical. So of the initial 6, another favourite of mine is Tempting Fate, which is set in the early 20th century. And look at that for a jacket. They just don't make them like that anymore. This is a first, published by St. Martin's Press. And in this, Saint-Germain, he's a very humane vampire. He generally doesn't kill people. He goes a bit ape in this one, actually. It's really exciting. And it's more exciting because he doesn't commit many acts of violence. He's wise, he's urbane. He usually gets by on threat, and he drinks blood. What he does, he visits women in the night, in their sleep, in their dreams, and samples a little bit of the red stuff and he brings them wonderful erotic dreams. And he's very pro women. He's kind of a feminist character. In each book, there's a different female heroine, but throughout them, there are one or two women who he lays with enough for them to become members of his revenant clan. And he's not keen on making vampires because usually a lot of people are not up to it. But he finds a couple. There's a woman called Olivia Clements, who is the Roman woman who is in this one, Atta Olivia Clemens, and really, really fantastic character. And she has her own mini sequence within these as well. And the lady who is in, let me see, who is in Hotel Transylvania, Madeline, she has her own mini sequence too within the overall series. And I would say they are, if you like historical fiction, they're fantastic. And they're really different to the average vampire novel, and yet they have a lot of the classical sort of stuff as well. So I really love those. Those are my favorite series of vampire novels. They're far more sophisticated than the later works of Anne Rice or of anybody I can think of who writes vampire fiction. I don't really like vampire series. I tend to like singletons. Singletons are usually much better. And I'll do a clip one day about my favorite singleton vampire novels. So Chelsea Quinn Yarbro, this is kind of the origin backstory. And there's bits in Transylvania, bits in Egypt. Do give her a try. Fantastic. I say my first choice would be Blood Games. I'd love a first edition of this, but they're like hen's teeth and they're impossibly expensive. So watch out for them. Do try and pick them up. And you know, also another great one if you see it. This is a slightly later one, Mansions of Darkness, which is set in Peru, I think in the 16th century. Saint-Germain is always coming under suspicion because he poses as a human being. 17th century Peru, and he has a sidekick who is known as Roger. The names change with the times and the places. So he's always got a slightly different name in different times and places. And his manservant is a ghoul. He eats flesh, and he's an immortal as well. He's not a vampire, he's a ghoul. It sounds ridiculous, but it's done so well. They're so wise and urbane, these guys. And this is in 17th century Peru, where Saint-Germain clashes with the Catholic Church. One of many times he does that. And he ends up being crucified. And it's really, really exciting book. Fantastic stuff. So that's Chelsea Quinn Yarbro, one of my favourite formula comfort readings. She is supposed to have a couple of new Saint-Germain books up. She's gone very quiet. I get the feeling she might have lost her publishing deal with Tor. So Tor, get it together, get those books out, and if you can pick them up, do try and buy new copies of ebooks so that the authors get royalties, because authors need royalties. Buying secondhand is all very well and good, and we've all done it. Sometimes we have to because books out of print, but do try and get royalties to these authors because they need them. Good night. I wore the white, of course, because, of course, and you invoke the dark things, you never know what's going to happen. And as I say, one more little glimpse for you. Do read Chelsea Quinn Yarbro, the Saint-Germain Chronicles. Fantastic stuff.